Alright guys, this is going to be 10 fun and powerful DLC and regular game builds that I think you guys are absolutely going to enjoy and are a ton of fun to play. I have had a great time going through the game with each one of these individual builds, and I think you guys should know about them. So let's go ahead and jump into the very first one, and we also are going to have a special appearance from Matt, your average gamer here, so make sure to go check him out as well. Now the first build we're going to be looking at on this list is going to be a Red Bear Claw build at level 150 with 80 strength. We're going really hard into the strength aspect of this weapon, and you will not be disappointed. You're going to be doing a good amount of physical damage. Red Bear Hunt is an absolutely fantastic Ash of War, and with the added bonus of having blood loss build up on the weapon, you are also going to be getting blood loss procs, but not nearly as often as you would think. In my playtime with this build, I found that I really wasn't building up a ton of hemorrhage, but if you want to do a more blood-centric build, you could definitely use this weapon. We're using buffs and our Flask of Wondrous Physic to boost our damage like crazy, as well as our talismans in order to get the most damage out possible, or a really good amount of physical damage without a ton of min-maxing going on. Basically, if you find this weapon in the DLC and you want to pick it up and use it, this is a perfect build for you. So for the build, we're going to be using the Bear Claws as well as the Dagger with Golden Vow Ash of War on it. We're also using the Pelt of Ravla for the aesthetic, and then the Rakshasa armor set. For your talismans, you're using the Shard of Alexander, the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the Rottenwing Sword Insignia, and the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. And for your flask, you'll use the Thorny Cracked Tear as well as the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear, as well as for your last buff, Flame Grant Me Strength. For your stats, you're level 150 with Vigor 60, Mind 15, Endurance 25, Strength is at 80, Dexterity is at 16, Intelligence is at 7, Faith at 15 for Flame Grant Me Strength, and Arcane is at 11. Next up, we're going to have a really powerful Dragon Hunter's Great Katana build. I actually fell in love with the Great Katanas during the DLC. It was a fantastic new weapon type, and with slash and pierce damage, you're going to get a really great combination of damage type, as well as some really awesome physical damage. Now when it comes to its Dragon Wound Slash, if you go up against dragons with it, you are going to do a comical amount of damage to them, because the buff of this weapon allows you to do extra damage to dragon type enemies. It's going to have run-of-the-mill scaling with strength and dexterity right at C, but you're also going to get blood loss on this weapon. On top of all of that, Dragon Wound Slash is actually going to have a ranged projectile, where if you hit your enemy with the ranged projectile and your physical weapon, you're going to do more damage. We're absolutely going to be sweeping through the entire game with this weapon, and once you get into the DLC and use this weapon, it's also going to be a lot of fun, and especially against Bale, you're going to have a really easy time. The skill is chargeable, so we're going to be using things like the Godfrey icon to make this build work, as well as using a few buffs that's going to allow us to boost our physical damage as well as our damage negation. Now, the last thing I want to mention is obviously I said this does more damage to dragon type enemies. However, the exact damage is 30% increased damage against dragon type enemies and 15% damage against ancient dragon type enemies. So anytime you're in Fair Missoula or anywhere that has a ton of dragons like Caelid, this is definitely going to be the weapon you want to pull out. Now this is going to be a level 170 build. We're using the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana as well as whatever armor set you would like. I just wanted to get over 52 poise with this one, but if you want to min-max here, definitely go the Rakshasa armor set to get that 8% more damage. For your talismans, you're using the Shard of Alexander, the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Godfrey Icon, as well as the Axe Talisman. I love those heavy charged R2s with this weapon, so that's why the Axe Talisman is here. For my flask, I was using the Dexterity Crystal Tier as well as the Green Burst Crystal Tier. If you really want to go hardcore damage, use the Blood Sucking Crack Tier here, and then whatever kind of secondary tier you would like, whether it's a damage negation or whatever your personal playstyle is, but I found that these suited the build very well. And lastly, when it comes to your stats, you'll have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance, 60 Strength, 41 Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and 8 Arcane.
Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer. Drop it in on Pastor Gaines Games build video to talk about Messmer Soldier's Spear, a phenomenal weapon, an absolute sleeper, an amazing weapon with Royal Knight's Resolve because it affects both of the hits on the charge attacks for massive damage. And you can also build up on successive hits with it as well. It is an incredibly impressive ability for the charge attacks. You get insane levels of damage. You're honestly going to hit a lot of enemies and bosses in the game for over 5,000 damage with the charge attacks and Royal Knight's Resolve. Building around it here, you want to make sure that you have things like the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Axe Talisman, Charge Tier, as well as the Thorny Tier, because you can build up and use both for crazy amounts of damage. You can see the Draconic Tree Sentinel went down really fast. By the way, on higher New Game Plus cycles, this is one of the few DLC weapons that can consistently posture break too. It's really great for that. Even on New Game Plus 7, this one really hits hard. For equipment, you're going to want a heavy Messmer Soldier Spear with Royal Knight's Resolve. We've got Golden Vow, Ash of War, and a Dagger, Claw Mark Seal, Rakshasa Set, Axe Talisman, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, and the Spear Talisman as well.
Appreciate that, Matt. And also for your flask for this build, you do want to use the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear as well as the Stone Barb Cracked Tear for those extra stance breaks. And then for your stats, you're going to have a level 150 build with 60 Vigor, 15 Mind, 25 Endurance, 80 Strength, 16 Dexterity, 7 Intelligence, 15 Faith for Flame Grant Me Strength, and 11 Arcane. Next up, we have one of my favorite builds that came to us from the DLC, and it absolutely shreds. When I say you can become a Beyblade of Dancing Death, this is definitely the build you want to use. We are going to be using the Dancing Blade of Ranah, which is absolutely phenomenal. It has an A scaling in Dexterity, a physical damage which is awesome, and the Unending Dance Ash of War is going to last as long as you have stamina in your bar. You can literally stand by a boss's feet and just swirl around, hitting him over and over and over again, proccing all the different consecutive attack talismans. We have some lifesteal in this build as well, which is a lot of fun, and per usual, we're going to be buffing that Unending Dance damage as much as possible. Now, there's a few different ways that you can play this build, but because I wanted to focus on the Ash of War and the fact that there's not really any hyper armor when you're doing your dance, you do need to have either the Bullgoat's Talisman equipped or a good armor set that's going to get you over that 51 poise mark, because if you don't have that, you're going to get staggered out and knocked out of this Ash of War constantly. The other awesome thing about the Blade of Ranah is the fact that it is a curved sword, which means yes, it does have that absolutely phenomenal jumping curved sword attack, which hits your enemies 4 times, absolutely devastating them. So on this screen, I don't know why I have the white mask equipped because there's absolutely no blood loss on this build, but you are going to be using the Dancing Blade of Ranah, the full Rakshasa armor set. I have Golden Vow on a dagger so I can get that buff. For my talismans, I'm going to be using the Shard of Alexander, the Milson's Prosthesis, the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, and in the 4th slot, you can either use the Bullgoat's Talisman, or I was using at times the Godskin Swaddling Cloth to get that extra healing on successive attacks. For my flask, I was using the Leaden Hard tier to boost that poise higher up, as well as the Thorny Crack tier, but I also switched out the Leaden Hard tier for the Crimson Sapping Crack tier, which is also going to stack on top of the Godskin Swaddling Cloth, allowing me to get even more HP back on hit. And lastly, for your stats, is level 150 build, 60 Vigor, 18 Mind, 28 Endurance, 16 Strength, 75 Dexterity. That +5 is coming from Milson's Prosthesis, 7 Intelligence, 19 Faith, and 11 Arcane. Our next build was just in a top 5 list, but considering this is a top 10 build videos list, this one definitely had to make the cut. I was absolutely astounded when I first tried this setup out, and it absolutely obliterated everything. This is going to be a blood build using the Blood Sword Lance and the Blood Tax Ash of War. We're going to be boosting our damage with every single piece of armor set we're wearing. We're also going to be boosting successive attacks, as well as getting Blood Tax to hit as hard as possible. And when everything is said and done, this weapon is going to have 161 blood loss buildup on it, as well as a really awesome scaling and strength. We're also going to be boosting our damage and damage negation with buffs, and this build performs incredibly well. I absolutely loved it. I was flying through the game. Every single boss that I came up against was absolutely devastated in no time. The only thing you need to watch out for is timing your blood tax windows in which you can get the entire Ash of War off, or you are going to get hit and knocked out of it, not getting the full effect. Not to mention, blood tax on top of all of everything else this build is doing is also going to give you some health back, which is only going to help with the survivability and the longevity you could be out in the world without resting at a site of grace. So for this build, we're going to be using the Sword Lance with a blood affinity on blood tax. We're also going to be using the white mask and the Onspatch armor set to boost our blood loss, as well as boost our blood tax Ash of War. For our talismans, we're using the Shard of Alexander, the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Milson's Prosthesis, as well as the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. For your flask, you're going to use the Thorny Crack tier as well as the Blood Sucking Crack tier to boost those successive attacks even further, as well as give you 20% more damage overall. And for your buffs, you want to use Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. For your build, it's going to be a level 150 build with Vigor 60, Mind 18, 19 Endurance, Strength is at 30, Dexterity is at 25, Intelligence is at 7, Faith is at 25 for our buffs, and Arcane is up at 50. Now when it comes to our next build, we are going to be using the Greatsword of Damnation, which is probably the most confused weapon that we got in the entire DLC. It is a really fun weapon to use, being a greatsword and having some great pierce damage. The physical damage is great, the holy damage is okay, and its scaling is absolutely terrible. But where this weapon excels is when you are against a humanoid NPC or enemy of that type. See, the Ash of War Golden Crux is actually a two-part Ash of War that can be used to either do a massive area of effect damage with holy spikes on the ground, or if you're against a humanoid NPC, you can shove the sword into their head as a grab attack and then explode spikes out of their body on the second portion of the Ash of War. This will do an immense amount of damage, so we're going to be spiking the holy damage of this build as much as possible so we can get that attack to hit as hard as we can. We are using buffs per usual. This is going to be a level 150 build, and a greatsword is overall one of the better weapon types in the entire game, so I'm very excited to share this build with you guys. Not only is this a greatsword, but it has a unique moveset, giving you a thrust attack much like the Claymore, which is definitely a really nice and advantageous attack to have, especially in PvP, being able to keep your enemies at bay. You'll notice in this build, I'm not using the Rakshasa armor set. However, if you want to use that to min-max and do more damage, you definitely can, but sometimes you just gotta dress for aesthetics. The only thing I don't like about this weapon is the fact that it doesn't have madness on it, considering we get it from a madness boss, but I guess the lore is this weapon keeps the madness at bay, so having holy damage would make a little bit of sense, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments. So for this build, we're going to be using the Greatsword of Damnation. We're also going to be using the Sword of Light at times. That's going to boost our holy damage by 20%. For your armor, you can use whatever you would like. For my talismans, I'm using the Shard of Alexander, the Holy Scorpion Charm, the Retaliatory Cross Talisman, as well as the Two-Handed Sword Talisman. For my flask, I'm using the Holy Shrouding Cracked Tear, as well as the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear, and for my buffs, I use Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow, but definitely take note here because the Sword of Light's Ash of War is a body buff, and Flame Grant Me Strength is also a body buff, so those two will not stack, so you just need to be mindful of when you're buffing and what you want to use for what fight. For my stats, this is level 150 build with 57 Vigor, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance, 60 Strength, 18 Dexterity, 7 Intelligence, 30 Faith, and 11 Arcane. So for our next build, we're going back to a familiar weapon, the Sword Lance. However, I wanted to go pure strength with this weapon and use a heavy Cragblade stance break build, and I was not disappointed. With the heavy affinity on this weapon, you're going to get a massive amount of physical damage. Cragblade is going to add stance and stamina damage to your weapon, allowing you to completely obliterate enemies. You're going to be breaking stances very quickly, pretty much in 2 hits on every single boss, and with the added bonus of the Rakshasa armor set, as well as all the damage we're doing with our heavy charged R2s via talismans, flask, and choosing your windows of opportunity carefully, you are going to have a really fun and easy time playing through this game. This is a level 150 build, obviously with a majority of the stats into strength, and we're also going to be using a buff or two in order to get our physical damage up even higher than everything else we've stacked so far. I do think that the Sword Lance is probably one of the best remembrance weapons that you're going to get in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and it shows brightly in this particular build. Anytime you have the ability to break stances, do a ton of physical damage with a strength build, I feel it overall just makes the game very, very easy, and you just have to face roll your keyboard or your controller in order for you to succeed with this particular build. Now for the build, we're going to be using the Heavy Sword Lance, obviously with that heavy affinity on Cragblade. We'll have a dagger with the Golden Vow Ash of War. Obviously, armor, we're using all of the Rakshasa armor set for that extra 8% damage. For your talismans, you're using the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman, the Spear Talisman, as well as the Axe Talisman for those heavy charged R2s. For our flask, we are using the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear for more damage, as well as the Spike Cracked Tear to boost our heavy charged R2s even further. And for your other buff, you're going to be using Flame Grant Me Strength for that extra physical damage. Now this is a level 150 build with 60 Vigor, 15 Mind, 25 Endurance, 80 Strength, 16 Dexterity, 7 Intelligence, 15 Faith for Flame Grant Me Strength, and 11 Arcane. So for this next build, I wanted to show some love to our intelligence users because the last few builds I've come out with have not been caster builds at all, so I thought I'd take a crack at the Maternal Staff build, boosting our finger sorceries and just giving the finger sorceries a test in this particular expansion. However, I'm actually a little bit taken aback at how hard it is to make this type of build work. There is an incredibly high scaling for Arcane and Intelligence with this build. Both of them are at A. However, it's not going to be noticeable until you're way over level 200 because of how many stats it takes in order for this weapon to be good and boost your sorceries high enough. Now, with that being said, you're still going to do a decent amount of damage, and you are going to have fun playing with this build because I've designed it to stand behind a very powerful summon while you just cast and spam down the boss, easy peasy. Now, obviously, you just saw a boss takedown in the DLC, and those DLC bosses have a lot more health. However, as you can see when we're fighting Margaret the Fell Omen here, the finger sorcery spells do a ton of damage in the base game. You're also going to get some stance damage from these spells as well, so you are going to be able to break stances. So if you want to equip a secondary weapon in order to break a stance, maybe like a crit dagger, then that is definitely an opportunity and option for you. We are going to be using certain gear in order to boost our finger sorceries even higher, and everything you're seeing here is recorded in New Game Plus 3, so if you try to use this in base game or New Game Plus 1 and 2, you're going to be doing even more damage than you see here. I currently am not a huge fan of intelligence builds or casting builds in general, but I feel like this one is pretty fun and performs very well, considering this build doesn't even have the best gear on it. Now for this particular build, it's pretty hard to make it amazing until you're up above level 200 because of the intelligence and arcane scaling, both of them being at A. However, this is going to boost your finger sorceries, so we're using the Maternal Staff. We're also going to be using whatever you would like, except definitely use the Finger Robe because it's going to give you an 8% increase to your finger sorceries as well. For your talismans, you can use the Magic Scorpion Charm. I'm using the Cerulean Amber Medallion plus 3, but in this slot, if you want to change it, you can either use the Graven Mass Talisman or the Ritual Sword Talisman in order to get some more damage from your spells. In slot number 3, we're using the Graven School Talisman. In slot number 4, we have the Godfrey Icon for our charged spells. For your flask, you're going to use the Magic Shrouding Crack tier and the Cerulean Hidden tier just to eliminate of that FP consumption. And for the build, it's a level 150 build with Vigor 60, Mind 20, Endurance 16, Strength 16, Dexterity is 9, Intelligence at 60, Faith is at 8, and Arcane is at 40. Now for this next build, we are using a Stormblade build. I've never really used this Ash of War in all the hours that I've been playing, but in the new DLC, we got some talismans that are going to really enhance the Stormblade Ash of War, so I decided to tool around with it and see what I could come up with. It's a really fun build, and it takes literally zero skill to play. This is a complete Ash of War spam build, I am aware of that, and this build is designed to be played with summons, which I'm going to explain when we get to the actual stats and equipment of the video. Just know I've paired it with the Great Shield Soldier Ashes, and it is a ton of fun because rarely do they lose aggro, so you can sit back and just cast Stormblade over and over and over again. As long as your stamina bar stays decently full and you don't run out of FP, you're going to be able to just sit there and not get hit while doing a decent amount of damage. Now, one nice thing about Stormblade is the fact that if you're close enough and hit your enemy with the Stormblade Ash of War and then your weapon as well, it's going to count for even more damage, triggering both the physical and the Stormblade damage of this weapon. However, in my opinion, this build is best played sitting back and just casting Stormblade constantly because it is going to be the easiest way I have found to play Elden Ring possible. Now, another great thing about this build is the fact that you can really take down bigger enemies quickly. I know a lot of times with melee builds in general, especially if you need to lock onto the head of an enemy, just like you can see on this giant dragon, Borealis the Freezing Fog, then you are rarely going to be able to hit him considering the positioning of his head is always way above where you can swing with your sword. That is not the case with the Stormblade. As you can see, I can target the head and spam the Ash of War, allowing me to get that head critical damage that I wouldn't be able to normally get before. So this is going to be a level 170 build. We're going to be using the Iron Greatsword in order to get that great strength scaling, and we're also putting Stormblade on this weapon as well. Then for your armor, you're going to be using the Divine Beast head, then whatever armor you would like to. If you want more damage, use the Rakshasa set here instead of what I have. Then for our talismans, I wanted to do something new. We're using the Dried Bouquet, which is going to raise attack power when a spirit summon dies, so I've paired this with the Great Shield Soldier Ashes because they do stick around for a while, but then eventually they do die, giving you that extra attack power boost. We're also using Enraged Divine Beast, then we're using the Shard of Alexander and the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for the rest of our talismans. For your flask, I'm using the Thorny Crack tier as well as the Greenburst Crystal tier, and for my buffs, I'm using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. Now for your stats, this is level 170 build. We have Vigor at 60, Mind at 16, Endurance is at 32, Strength is at 84, Dexterity is at 24, Intelligence is at 9, Faith at 25, and Arcane is at 7. And last up, we're going to end this entire video with a banger. This is the Devonian Hammer build. It does dumb amounts of damage. You're going to be using a colossal weapon like you would use Ordovis's Greatsword. There is an immense amount of stagger and stance damage you're going to get from not only the physical damage of this weapon, but also the impact damage that it has once the Ash of War hits the ground. Every single boss that I came across in the New Game Plus 2 playthrough that you're watching right now was absolutely staggered to death, and obliterated with minimal effort. All it takes is a few charges of the Ash of War in order for you to slam down on your enemies, cause a massive area of effect of holy damage on the ground, and do multiple hits. It is a absolutely fantastic weapon, definitely in my top 5 favorite weapons that came to us from the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and I think you're definitely going to want to try this out, if for nothing else, just to see how ridiculous it can be. So don't pay attention to the stats on the right here. This is just showing you what gear I was using. I'll show you the correct stats in just a minute. Obviously, we have the Devonia's hammer at plus 10. You can use whatever armor set you would like. I just wanted to use this set because I think it looks amazing. For your talismans, you're going to use the Shard of Alexander, the Godfrey icon, the two-handed sword talisman, as well as the Sacred Scorpion charm. For your flask, you want to use the Holy Shrouding cracked here, as well as the Stone Barb cracked here, and for buffs, you're going to be using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. Now for the stats of this build, you are going to be using 57 Vigor, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance, 60 Strength, Dexterity is at 18, Intelligence at 7, Faith is at 30, and Arcane is at 11. If you do want to do more Faith than Strength, you can do that. That will just make your Ash of War hit a little bit harder with the holy damage, but I found out that this worked out well. And guys, that is going to be it for this top 10 build video. Thank you guys so much for staying until the end of the video. I absolutely appreciate it. If you got value or enjoyed the content that you've been seeing so far on the channel, make sure to subscribe on your way out. It helps the channel out a ton. We are only 25,000 away from 100K, which is absolutely bananas, and it's all your fault. So thank you guys so much for that. I appreciate it. Make sure to check the description for anything that you want to check out, like the Discord or the Patreon. And until next time, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.